Friends, welcome to another section of my videos. In this demo, I am going to show you Fortigate Firewall VM using VMware Workstation. These are the points that I am going to cover in this demo. I will be configuring the Fortigate Firewall VM in VMware Workstation. There will be 10 ports in the firewall VM provided by Fortigate. I will be configuring only 2 ports. Port will be acting as LAN address and another port will be acting as WAN address. I will show you that during my demo. The fourth point is to create a policy, firewall policy, so that my LAN connection can communicate with the WAN connection. These are the 4 points that I am going to cover in this demo. And I will just show the details of my lab environments. I am going to use 2 virtual machines in this lab. One is Windows Server 2012, another one is Fortigate Firewall VM. My Windows Server 2012 has an IP address of 10.10.0.1 with a default gateway of 10.10.0.100 and the fully qualified domain name of my server is dc.myhomelab.local, and the IP that I am going to provide for my firewall VM is for port 2 I will be configuring as 10.10.0.100, which is actually the internal LAN IP. Also acts as the default gateway for all of my servers, client machines, or what are the systems that are going to run behind the firewall. And for port 1 I am going to configure it as WAN IP, which I will be receiving from my WAN modem connection. I will show the topology for this thing. And in the Fortigate Firewall VM, as just told, I will be using 2 NICs. Network card will be used for port 1, which will be used to get the WAN IP. One network card will be used to configure port 2, which will be acting as my LAN IP, that is internal to the firewall. And these are configuration details that I am going to configure in port 2. Before going into the demo, I will just show the topology that we will be following today. This is the topology that we are going to follow today. I'll just explain this. Actually, I am using this virtual machine inside my physical desktop. You can see this is my physical desktop. Now what I have done is that I have created a virtual machine on my physical desktop, and I am going to use these 2 virtual machines, that is Windows Server 2012 and Fortigate Firewall VM. So from the Windows Server 2012 point of view, it will be acting internal to the firewall. That is, this Server 2012 running behind this firewall. Now, this firewall will actually have 2 NICs in this demo. First network card will be configured for port 1 and second network card will be configured for port 2. Now port 1 will be acting as external to the firewall, which is this violet color, which will be acting as external network card to the firewall. The meaning here is that the IP address that I am going to receive is actually my wired modem I have connected to my physical desktop. I will be receiving the internet connection from my ISP. So from the firewall point of view, it will receive the IP address from my wired modem connection, and port 2 will be configured as internal, which will be the LAN connection. So from this Windows Server 2012 point of view, the IP address for this server 2012 is 10.10.0.1. The default gateway will be 10.10.0.100, which is actually the internal IP address for firewall. This black color will indicate that internal IP address for firewall, that is this 10.10.0.100, will be internal to the firewall. So this Windows Server virtual machine can connect to this firewall through this default gateway, and the firewall will connect to the internal to my wired modem. I'll just show the shorter version of this topology. You can see this is the scenario that we are going to follow in this demo. A virtual machine will get an IP from a firewall, which I will be configured in internal LAN network, and my firewall will getting an IP address which will be acting as my WAN IP. That IP I will be receiving it from my internal modem. So from this demo point of view, you will see that my firewall is actually connecting to the internet using the public IP address. I'll just show and explain all these things during my demo. This is just a topology to make you understand what I'm going to do in this demo. I'll just explain again. This firewall will receive the WAN IP from my wired modem and then it will get connected to the internet. Now let's move to the demo. There you can see I have two virtual machines. One is Fortigate Firewall VM and another one is Windows Server 2012. And use this demo also to create a virtual network, which means that apart from the public IP, you can use any private IP and create a lab environment in your home itself. So the name of this server is DC and the fully qualified domain name of this server is dc.myhomelab.local, an IP address of 10.10.0.1. I'll just show you the IP address settings. So that will make things clear for you. There you can see I have configured the default gateway as 10.10.0.100. This is actually the IP that I am going to configure it in my firewall. I'll show you during the demo of the firewall. This is just to make you understand that my server and DNS are same. With an IP address of 10.10.0.1 and with a default gateway of 10.10.0.100. And the subnet mask that I have used here is 255.0.0.0. That will make things clearer for you. Let's move to the firewall. Default the Fortigate Firewall VM that's being provided will have 10 ports. You can see here. This will be acting as ports 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. You can use any of the 10 ports based on your company requirements. For this demo, I am going to use only 2 ports, port 1 and port 2. You can see I will be using only 2 ports. It depends on your company requirements or your lab requirements. You can use any of the 10 ports. So for port 1, I have configured as VMnet 0. I mean the network adapter that I have set for this port 1 is VMnet 0, which is actually the auto bridging, and port 2 I have configured it as bridged adapter. So you may ask why I have configured this as VMnet 0. This is a concept in VMware Workstation called Virtual Network Editor. Now you can see that it is by default configured as auto bridging for VMnet 0, which means that my physical desktop LAN adapter will connect to this virtual machine and it will receive an IP address directly from my wired modem. This is to make things clear that actually I don't have the exact physical setup in my home lab. So that's why I have showed this topology, which will help you to understand things. I have actually created 2 virtual machines. One is Windows Server 2012 and another one is Firewall. And this firewall will have 2 ports, port 1 and port 2. Port 1 will be configured for accessing the external network, that is the internet. Port 2 is configured as internal to the firewall to access my servers and clients. Now you can click start, power on the virtual machine. Now before this scenario, I will just show what I have in a domain controller. I am just trying to browse Google. Here you can see I have no internet connection because my server actually tries to connect my firewall, and since I haven't connected my firewall, my server cannot get any internet. I'll just show you www.google.com. There you can see I'm not able to any of the internet sites because the IP address default gateway I have given here is that 10.10.0.100, which is actually the firewall IP. So my server will actually try to connect the firewall, and as of now we haven't configured any policy in the firewall. So my LAN and WAN will not get communicated, so naturally my server won't get any internet. Now once you get this screen, by default login name is admin and the password is blank. So you can just enter and again enter. There you can see this is the console of the Fortigate Firewall VM. As told in the document, this is the step that we are going to follow here. I am going to configure IP address 10.10.0.100 on my port 2. So this is the first step, config system interface. Second step is edit port 2. And we have to set the IP address of 10.10.0.100 with subnet mask of 255.0.0. We have to allow access where HTTP, HTTPS or ping or telnet or SSH based on company requirements, and finally you have to select end. Now before performing these steps, I'll just show that I cannot able to connect my firewall in my server ping 10.10.0.100, and I'm going to give it as a continuous ping. You can see I'm not going to receive any reply because as told earlier my server cannot able to connect to my firewall. We are going to configure the firewall. The first step is that config system interface. Now it has logged into the interface terminal, and there you have to type edit port 2. There you can see it will get into the port. There you have to type set IP 10.10.0.100 space 255.0.0.0. Hit enter. Then I'll just show the documentation. First three step has been completed. The fourth step is that you have to allow access so that I can get my firewall into the browser control of my server. Now you can see if I type HTTP 10.10.0.100, I cannot able to get my firewall in browser because HTTP session will by default be blocked in the firewall VM, which is by default. You can change it manually during your installation process. For that I am going to allow access. Based on your company requirement, you can type anything you want. So for this session I am going to type it as HTTP, HTTPS and ping. You can also use telnet and SSH, and the final step is end. Hit enter. Now you can see in my server I could able to connect to my firewall. There you can see. Now my Windows server could able to connect to its default gateway, which is nothing but the 10.10.0.100 IP, and also I could able to bring that firewall into my Windows server browser. That makes things clear. After, you can also use the command prompt if you are well versed in the mode, but for this demo I'm not going to use any command. I'm just going to configure everything in the GUI mode. By default it's admin and the password is blank. Once you hit enter, you will log into the firewall VM. Default Fortigate gives it as a 14 days trial. So after 14 days none of the commands will work. So you have to get your new version. You can log into the Fortigate website and give your name and company details, and Fortigate customer care will get in touch with you and they'll give you a 14 days trial with a serial key. So for this demo I'm just using a trial version. So after 14 days none of the commands will work. So my Fortigate VM is really disabled. Click remain later. So the first step I'll just show you here is click network and just click interface, which will show all the 10 ports that has been used in this virtual machine. So for this demo we are just going to use only port 1 and port 2. You can see just the model console of our Fortigate Firewall VM. As told earlier, my VMware network editor has been connected to VMnet 0 with auto bridging. So by default my Fortigate Firewall has been configured to VMnet 0 for port 1. For port 2 it has been configured as bridged adapter. So in the console, if I click port 2 and select edit, there you can see it has been configured as 10.10.0.10, which is actually the first IP address which will be acting as the LAN IP address for my firewall. There at the top you can type any name you want. You can either type internal or LAN to make things understandable for you. You can either select manual or DHCP based on your company requirements. If you have multiple firewalls, you can select DHCP. Now I have actually given a private this IP address in this step. So I am going to use this 10.10.0.1 as an internal to my network. I'll just show the topology. Now my Windows server will connect to 10.0.100, which is actually internal to the firewall, and click OK. Now my port 1 will actually receive an IP address from my wired modem as shown in the topology. I have configured the internal IP address. Now to configure the external IP address, I have selected the port 1 as VMnet0, which will try to get an IP from a wired modem, which is actually the IP address that I will be receiving from my ISP in the 192.168 series. To make things clear, actually my physical desktop will also receive an IP from this wired modem. So when you consider this overall topology, I will be receiving two IP addresses, one for my physical desktop, one for my firewall, which is a virtual machine. You could be able to understand this topology. Entire scenario on this demo will be very easy. So you click port 1 and select edit. There you can see manual or DHCP. Now if you select manual, you can give your IP address manually. So in this step you will actually be giving your public IP address, the series or any 203 or 204 or 204 based on your ISP requirements. So for this demo I am not going to use any manual IP address because I don't have any public IP address. So I am going to select it as DHCP and I am going to type it as WAN. Now if I click OK and then return back, you can able to see that it's trying to get an IP address from my wired modem. Naturally it will get an IP address from my wired modem. There you can see it's 192.168.1.4. This is the IP address which will be actually connected to my ISP through my wired modem, and the default gateway of my modem is 192.168.1.1. So to make things clearer for you, 192.168.1.4 IP address will actually act as a public IP address for my firewall for this workstation. So to explain in simple, this server will actually connect to the 10.10.0.10 series through my LAN network, and this firewall will connect to my external internet through the public IP address, which in this demo is actually 192.168.1.4. Just clicking it OK. Now let's see the documentation. I have configured the firewall in VMware Workstation. I configured the LAN IP address in port 2. I have configured the WAN IP address in port 1, which is actually the DHCP IP received from my wired modem. And the last step here is that we have to create a policy in firewall so that you will be telling your firewall what the LAN and WAN connection should be doing. Which means when this Windows server tries to connect my firewall, what firewall should do, that policy you will be defining in the fourth step. So for that, go to the policies and objects. You can see IPv4, and there you can click create new, select OK. The first thing is that incoming interface, which is what will be the first connection that this firewall will be receiving, which in this demo is actually the LAN connection, which means port 1, port 2. Port 2 will be acting as my incoming interface. So to explain things clearer, when this Windows server is connecting my firewall, this 10.10.0.1 IP will be actually acting as my LAN 2 IP address. So that will be serving my firewall as incoming interface. And the source address, there are various steps here. You can select anything based on your company requirements. For this demo, to make it simple, I am going to set it as all. So what will be the outgoing interface, which will naturally be 1. So in this case, it is when an IP address comes to my internal LAN will forward it to the outgoing interface, which will actually the port 1. And the destination address will be all. Make things simple in this demo, and connection has to be denied or accepted. For this demo I am going to accept. Now, the very important thing here is that you have to select NAT on. Now, if you are into the VMware the concepts, you could able to understand what NAT really does here. It actually is to connect your internal and external LAN network with a private IP address. You can Google on that subject. That's a different topic actually. And for this service, I am going to select it as all. You can select any one particular service, but for this demo, I am going to select it as all. Sure that NAT is enabled. If you disabled, you cannot able to get internet connection. Now I just click OK. You can see the policy has been created. Now if I go and type google.com, my server will get an internet connection from the firewall, which actually gets an IP address from my wired modem. So in the sense is that my Windows server will connect to the firewall, and that firewall will get an IP address from my wired modem. Then my server will get an internet connection. It just takes some time to refresh. I'll just pause the video. Yeah, there you got the output. A little bit time for me to get refreshed, and it could for you also in the lab session. You can also restart the network or the virtual machine to check whether it's the network problem or the virtual machine problem. That's the scenario here. My Windows Server 2012 will now be able to get internet connection through this firewall. Now I would like to mention a few points here. Now, when you going to create a policy, for this demo I have created only one policy, which is what will happen when there is a communication between a LAN and WAN. You can also create a policy vice versa, which means what will happen there is a communication between WAN and LAN. For example, if you are going to download a file from the internet, whether your cursor will connect to the WAN or not, you can create a policy for that. And this is actually the order in which the policy will be executed. Suppose I create another policy. The policy that is first will get executed. The policy that is in the second sequence will get executed next, and the policy in the third sequence will get executed at the last. And another point which I like to mention here is that you can also create a static route here. For this demo I haven't created any, but you can also create a static route and mention for which port you want to have a static IP address, which means you can, in this demo, you can give your modem IP, say 192.168.1.1 is actually my modem IP. So in real case scenario, if you have any router, if you have multiple firewalls, you can have a static route for here. So that's for this demo. Hope I covered all these 4 points. Do share your feedback. It should encourage me to do more of these videos. Thank you friends. Thank you for watching.